48-hour art check, episode 118.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we are. Here we are. And apparently,
yeah, here we are. Good times. We got Squatchy and Matthew in the chats. For anybody interested in knowing more about like Matthew, check out the last art casters.
That was a great episode of that.
Yeah, and he actually sent me a message like I got to send him a mailing address so he can send me some of his awesome, like he makes and directs like really cheesy B movies, and I'm really excited.
Does he have the? I didn't catch the whole thing. I got about halfway through, but did he has those posted online, or is there a way to watch those?
I think they were just released like as part of like film festivals and stuff, and I think they do have copies. So yeah, definitely hit him up. But yeah, I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, that would be cool. That'd be way cool. I used to watch. I don't know how far-reaching this was, but USA Up All Night was like.
Nice.
It was like this. You know, I think everybody had that, but it was like this little like some semi-famous actress. You know, like a C-list actress that would like make.
Elvira?
Really... No, it wasn't Elvira. I didn't get that where I grew up, but it was always like somebody that was like. Sort of in like 90210 or something. You know, it was like somebody that was like kind of in several shows that you recognize, never quite a main character. And then they would always like do like weird little bits and whatever, like as it went into and came out of like commercial breaks. And then it was just like these awesome, like terrible movies, just awful movies.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Matthew after we recorded, but our local one was this one called Monster Piece Theater. And like I should actually see if they have any of that online, but it was funny. Like the guy had puppets and like a whole set, and it was like the kind of thing like like Scott Serkland, like his YouTube set would look like.
Yeah.
But it was really cool.
Yeah, I had at one point I was like, I wonder if there's anything on that, and someone, I don't know how they did this, but somebody posted like every USA Up All Night like movie and the date that it played. Like they had the entire thing, and then they like people were doing commentary on it. So I don't know how far reaching it was. I think it was pretty localized. It might have just been like only Southern California or something, but
yeah,
I don't know. It was pretty rad, and I like looked back and I was like, wow, it's amazing that that's a thing, and it's not a thing anymore that I'm aware of. I haven't had cable or dish in like a long time, but
yeah, I think it went kind of the same place as like pirate radio, because it's like with the internet, like pretty much, most of those people could be running their own YouTube channels and stuff.
Right.
Although we are, broadcasting this from the back of like a speeding van, and we could be taken off the air anytime.
We're actually in the same van right now, and we just have a green screen behind us. This whole split screen is
exactly.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah.
And Squatchy's asking, remember Poor Man's Bikini Beach? That was like, I think a third of these were some sort of event or verb plus the word bikini was like a third of the show. I can't remember. I used to like make it about 20 minutes in and then fall asleep because they were always on at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was, a teenager or whatever. But yeah. They're terrible.
I was realizing this the other day before we get into the check, because Conan O'Brien now has like a podcast and is really good, and it's hilarious. But I was realizing like, he's like very meaningful to like my generation, because by the time I was in college, that's like there wasn't a ton of internet stuff. And so like that was the coolest thing on at like 2 in the morning when you were pulling an all-nighter, doing art stuff.
Right.
And wondering, like I was just in my head like trying to figure out if like he's as relevant to like a younger generation, because I know for my generation like that was like the hip like late night show, and so it's
because that was the late show.
Yeah.
right? That's not when he took over for Leno or whoever he took over
No.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pre Leno
right.
snafu. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Anyhow.
yeah. So there. Anyway, I don't know. Used to watch terrible movies. I never got into a ton of them, but I did like. I still own Reptilicus on DVD, and
Ooh.
I still maintain that is prime movies for just if you ever want to torture people.
Yeah, and Matthew talked about this. I don't want to reveal too much, but he has a very interesting take on the 48-hour art check that he's going to be doing, the 168-hour art check with a special visitor.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm really excited to see that too when he puts that in place.
Yeah, that's gonna be
So
great.
so let's get into the art check.
Okay.
We talked before we went going, and Cory and I might seem a little off our game, and it's because both of us actually had similar experiences of this foreign thing called sleep
Yeah.
today. And so I think we're a little delirious from like the good things that sleep does for your body. It's like I'm not. What is my body feeling right now? It's like
I
I don't
think
feel exhausted. I just feel a little like, yeah, this is
yeah,
good times.
it's a little bit. I don't know. It's like being drunk on not being tired. I've never actually been drunk, but like being, yeah, it's a euphoric feeling. This feeling of a full night's sleep. It's odd. So
I know.
anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
Don't get used to it, you guys, because we never sleep. So, all right,
Yeah.
let's get into it. You want to start?
Sure.
All right.
So I inked, I don't know when last we met or whatever, but I was hoping to finish this page. I said I was going to finish it by Monday, but I thought I might be able to knock it out today. That didn't happen. But basically I got 2 more panels done, and I started tightening the pencils for the final panel. And I spotted a bunch of the blacks. And so I burnt through my only like 0.005 micron that I have because I haven't done this style in a really long time, and so I've mainly switched all the way over to brush. Anyway, long story short, that kind of got in the way, and so I switched over to just spotting a bunch of the blacks. But I made some decent progress. I like where it's at.
Nice. And one thing I'll say is like with microns, like I always recommend just double up, and when you burn one, order the next.
Yeah, right.
Because it's like they dry out pretty quick. And Cory had expressed kind of an interest in like getting back into nib, like because we were kind of texting back and forth and stuff. And I kind of agree on that. I'm so fascinated by doing that because of the run out factor of the micron, or like the dead micron where you're just trying to get ink out of a dry like piece of fabric. It's you don't get that as much, but I don't like the splitting time thing. So I really need to get better with I guess that would just be a practice issue probably.
Well, and mine was a materials issue because I used to use significantly different paper back in the day when I was crow quilling. Is that a thing?
Got it.
When I was, because I think like, it doesn't matter, but I have a lot of nib tips that I got in like a calligraphy set, and most of them are flat of different thicknesses. But the crow quill is my favorite because you can get these really fine lines out of it. But it also gives you a little bit of line variation, nothing like a brush, but
Yeah.
maybe about a quarter the thickness of like the thickest you can get out of a brush. But man, this paper that I'm using, it did not work. Luckily, I tested it on a scrap piece of paper, but it just bled all over the place. With the brush and the felt tip, you're kind of running along the top of it, but with the nib, you're carving into it a little bit. And it just, when it broke those fibers, it was like, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that is tough. What paper are you using out of curiosity?
I just buy a big giant ream of this, semi-thick printer paper.
Got it.
It's actually the paper that Jake Parker recommends, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it takes brush pen really well.
Nice.
And it takes most cartridge-based instruments pretty well, but like as far as the traditional nib goes, I can't remember what I used to use, but it must have been better than this paper. Because this paper is pretty inexpensive. You get a ream of 500 sheets for, 25, $30 or something.
Oh wow, okay, that's way cheaper than Bristol. So
Oh yeah, no, it won't even touch Bristol, but I'm still in that mental state that I don't deserve to spend that much on paper. I need to get out of
well,
that, but yeah.
that's yeah, that's interesting, and maybe that should be a topic for another time because there is something of value to like cheaper materials because at least for me, I feel less precious when I'm using cheaper materials.
Right.
Like I actually feel more experimental and willing to kind of blow it because I'm like, it's not going to cost me like $2 like for
Right.
me to destroy the sheet of paper. It costs 2 cents. It's a little or 10 cents or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, cool. So let's get into. Oh wait, I gotta say mine.
Yeah.
So, I got finished with the pencils for both pages, and actually had this great experience of realizing that I don't need to tighten up and do the second pass for that last page for quarterly stories. What I do have to do, and this will tie into our topic a little bit later, but my wife had pointed out that like a shoulder is off on this kind of second panel, and it kind of makes the pose look a little weird. And so I have to get rid of a line on there, and then most of the other modifications I do with tight pencils, I can kind of do, I think, with the ink on that page. So I'm at the point of like being a little bit behind where I was hoping to be, but I think tonight after we do our art check, I should be able to kind of catch up to that. Because my main goal is tonight I'd like to have the rough lettering, or not the rough lettering, the inked lettering and panel borders for both pages done. Cool. So where I'm hoping to be tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So challenges.
Do
it.
Since Wednesday, I had the Gamers Guild Friday night, which is always fun. Just a group of us that get together and play board games.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's way cool. And some guys from some places that I used to work kind of get together. And so that was awesome, but it kind of burned that evening as far as like a work evening. I don't know. And then I slept way too much. Like I thought I got up with Maddox and then I thought I'd go back to bed for like an hour or whatever. And my body but I didn't set an alarm. So my body was like, no, you're just going to like try to catch up on some of the sleep debt that you've had the last 10 years. And so I slept till like noon. And then I was like, oh, okay. So that burned kind of half the day today. And that's why
it's always like a mixed feeling of like, yeah, that was awesome. And then you're like, but it's already 12.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why I'm giggly. It's because I had so much sleep.
Yeah. Understandable.
But yeah.
So
how about you?
So like what worked out for me was Friday actually worked for me to kind of push the 48-hour air check because I got home and I was just like mentally done. Like I had a really, really challenging week that just required me to be firing on all cylinders, and it was very effective, and I managed to get everything done that I needed to get done. But that day I just needed sleep, and so it's actually one of the few days where I kind of failed at every daily challenge and just like literally just went to bed when I got home, and after playing with my kid and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, like but I woke up. I slept in a bit, and I woke up today, and I've been feeling weird all day because I'm rested. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. That's cool. Way cool. So plans. I'm going to finish this page. That's my plan. So I have this panel to pencil and ink, and it's a little bit more complicated than the other panels because the other panels are kind of just monsters attacking the boat, or like kind of like a moment or a scene from an attack. But this actually has like multiple members of the Pequod crew like fighting, and so as the pencils kind of go by, you'll see like people leaping in the air and people like firing harpoon blasts. And anyway, so it's a little bit more action packed with more figures and less. Like with the monsters, at least the way that I draw them, you can kind of like fudge a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, you know, they're weird, so I drew it weird. But like with humanoid people know when it's off by looking at them. So, but yeah. So yeah. So how about you? Challenge or plans?
So I'll use part of my plans just to say that dragon looks awesome. I mean, the sea monster looks awesome. Nice. The Nessie type. But other than that, my plans are to get the next pages, probably like start inking, maybe be on the first or second panel of each page,
cool.
For both the quarterly stories page and for the hundreds anthology page. So that's where I'd like to be by the next time we do an art check. If I'm not there, that's pretty bad. That might mean I just got used to the sleep thing. So
yeah, you're not supposed to do that until you're dead. So
I'll also throw in there, I would like to get back on the train of editing, because I had started that as a habit, and then that night was kind of just the collapse of all things I was doing. So I'd like to do that too.
Yeah, and so those of you that are paying attention to the podcast, there should have been 2 new podcast episodes this week, and we have 2 that are loaded up and ready to go for next week, and that's where we're at. So there should be some consistency from here on out. Because I was dumb and didn't listen to Josh. We had like 10 in a row, and I was like, no, well, let's just do 10 straight days in a row. It'll be great. He's like, no, space it out. And then we had this giant gap because we got tired of doing it. So, and again, if anybody wants to jump in and wants a credit on the audio production, let us know.
Yes.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say it's the same kind of logic as anytime you're doing like weekly installments of anything, unless it's something like this, it's live and then you cut it and it's out.
Yeah.
I always recommend building up a queue, because that way you're able to do the weekly updates and not, fall behind.
Right.
But it is a hard lesson learned, and the only reason I recommended it is I've done the same thing. So you get so excited. You're like, I can't wait to hear what people think, So yeah.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to do something a little bit different this time. But if you guys want to, if you haven't already, share this video. You're on Josh's channel, so like, subscribe, all that jazz, everything that helps the algorithm do whatever. But today's topic is the hidden numbers and conspiracy of the world government that is hidden in the hash marks of comic book pages. Now, you guys might not know, but there is a secret society of comic book illustrators, and this does span into kind of like other guilds of illustration that are tied into the world governments, the breakaway world governments of like NASA, and like the competing like Chinese space program. And they have been programming message. I was trying to do it.
So they've been programming messages, and they've been hiring graphic designers to make the Earth look round rather than flat. And so like you'll notice throughout in those hash marks, there's actually, if you look at the negative space, there are secret messages that are being sent out to the New World Order to kind of communicate like the needs of the Dark Lord. So Cory and I are both on board with this. We just thought that you guys should know the deep secrets, the deep truth of we just.
And if you send me your credit card number, your mother's maiden name, and your wife's birthday, then I will give you the cipher to get the secret message. Sorry, no, we both
keep going. We've been on this kick where we've been watching a lot of conspiracy theory stuff just for kind of kicks, and we were like, like you could totally do like a pretty good conspiracy theory based on graphic design. Squatchy in the chat just said, "You just made me spit out my taco."
So that's part of the conspiracy is it's anti-taco.
And he's like, I was like, no.
Oh man. No, but like I do think there's messed up stuff out there that happens. But the thing that cracks me up with conspiracy theories is like it's like this string theory of weird crap is like, yeah, there must be one unifying thread that, anyway. Yeah, but we thought we could do a whole episode on that, but I was actually a little concerned that, I don't know, somebody at work might see it and I might lose my job or something.
They might believe it.
We thought he was, a pretty normal guy. Anyway, so yeah, that's how, I want to say that Matthew Instrom is saying that that's how Cory knows that robots are taking over the world. Yep.
That's true. That's true. We have the insider information. So do you want at some point, maybe when like we're just like, really sick of the 48-hour art check or something, we're going to do live streams that are just like us as alter egos that are a part of some deep, dark conspiracy and graphic design. That would be amazing.
Oh man. Cause I had this whole idea about how like the conspiracy theory guys, I hate the word conspiracy theorist. I don't know, whatever that is. The dudes who think that everything is connected. Because there is weird stuff that happens, but the dudes that think that everything is connected, it would be funny if one of the main arguments for this was, why are there ads on Hulu? Why are there ads in magazines? The subscription pays for that stuff. There's ads because they're trying to get their message to the masses.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Like you could kind of see that, kind of roll. Anyway.
Oh yeah. You'd be like, why do you think you like the art you like? You think you just like it?
Yeah.
It's because it's making subliminal messages to you that make you like it. That's why you like it.
Think about the proliferation of superheroes in modern media today. I mean, there's no reason for them to be as popular as they are.
Just show random patterns drawn and just be like, if you look at the pattern, it's actually saying like, buy my art.
If you watch the webbing of Spider-Man's web from panel to panel, you will see that there's this many. Anyway, yeah. Okay.
Anyhow, so
okay.
Wait,
all right.
Somebody in the chats just said the metal men of Mercury are teaming up with the mall monsters and the mole men over the government. They're using the comic books to communicate with one another. Yes, the mole men.
Right.
Yeah. So that'll be another topic. But we were actually thinking a topic that would be fun to do tonight is on a more serious note is opposition, and why I was kind of thinking of this, and we can kind of take it in whatever direction it ends up going. But was just that, like, I've had these incidents recently where I felt really benefited by knowing people who have opposing views on art, on life, on all sorts of things. And that, like, I think with the civility, you actually end up in this position where you can learn things that are outside of your own wheelhouse and improve and kind of worst case scenario, gain more knowledge, and best case scenario, like maybe gain something that will benefit you, and like I think that's something a lot of, especially like newer artists going to like school or going into like their first time in a workplace where they have like an art director over them or something like that, or a teacher kind of critiquing them. I think the tendency is to have this like wall of defense.
Yeah.
And I think that I just kind of wanted to bring up the opposition thing as an interesting thing to maybe approach opposition instead of from a place of defense, from a place of like opportunity, because
or curiosity.
Exactly, because I think that opposition actually breeds knowledge, and if anything, will at least inform you more about your own knowledge of whatever you're opposed to. And so, like, I don't know, it was just something that's been on my mind, and was just thinking would make an interesting topic. So, any thoughts on that, Cory?
Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts of this. I mean, it's such an interesting thing that in today's society, that we are being polarized so much that everyone is vilifying everyone else when in actuality, and it's not to say that that has never happened. I mean, there have been elections, in the early 1800s where the mudslinging was so bad that like people's wives died from like the stress of what people were saying about their husbands and stuff. It's like, so it's been, it's been pretty bad in American politics, but like, it's just cyclical, I think. And it's one of those time periods where, it's one of those, you're with us or you're against us. The problem that I have with that is not that I think one side is right or wrong, but that I think that we actually need opposition, because anything in an extremity becomes a huge problem, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, I think that one of the problems with Captain Planet was that the villains were ridiculously unrelatable. Like all of the villains like wanted to destroy the Earth. They were like, yeah, I love pollution. And they were like enjoying polluting rivers or whatever. And it was like, even as a kid, I was like, I don't think there are people like that. I think that people have made horrible decisions that negatively impact the environment, right? But but to say that there are people out there that are like, I love just dumping pollution in the river and killing all the fish. It's fun. That's not a reasonable take. And so, if you have actual opposition, you're going to have people that are going to say, there's this pole and then there's this pole. And if you go too far in one direction, the real solution to, conservatism or conservationism and all that stuff, environmentalism, is that humans don't exist anymore. It's kind of the Ultron thing. Like I looked at it, and if we want peace on Earth, then we need just to get rid of the conflict, which are people, right? And so that's obviously a swing too far. Then a swing too far in the other direction, and like there's no planet anymore because we just because everyone is a Captain Planet villain. And I think you can take almost any issue. And you could take it to a logical extreme and write a really good, sci-fi movie or episode of The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, right? Because you take anything and its extreme, it becomes problematic. And I'm also not one of those people that believes that, moderation in all things is a doctrine of Scripture that people should go by. Because one, it was something that I think Aristotle said, and he didn't mean it in the way that we're meaning it today. Because today we use it as an excuse to do a little bit of bad stuff, like a moderation in all things. I'm just gonna hit my wife every once in a while, and then it's a moderate amount of beating, And it's like there should be very clear lines in the sand.
Agreed.
That you're like, no, for me, I don't cross this line ever, no matter what. Right. And I think as a society, we have those. But the interesting thing about this is if you are not willing to engage with somebody who disagrees with you on something, then you're also not willing to admit that you might be wrong about something. And I think that's it's that fear or defensiveness of that. Like, Josh, if you came to me, and we are on different areas of several very deeply held things, in our lives. And if you came to me and my initial response was like, no, I don't want to broach that subject or whatever, because I know you disagree with me. Why do I have that? Why is that initial defense rise up? That's a really interesting thing, because what if I am wrong?
Yeah.
Do I want to be right for the sake of winning the argument and saving face? Or do I want to find the truth? Or do I want to learn more about something that I don't already know?
So this brings up a really powerful thing about what I kind of started with at the top with defensiveness, which is a really valuable question when going into like a potential confrontation or what could just be like a discussion of disagreement. It is really just like that age-old question of like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
And like I said, if the worst that could happen is you're going to die or something, then maybe it is an issue that's not worth broaching.
Right.
But if what the worst is going to happen is maybe like you'll look stupid or and I'm just talking about my own fears going into confrontations, or you'll not win an argument, which is used to be a huge struggle in my life where I really enjoyed arguing. I was on debates. I was in mock trial. I really liked winning arguments.
Yeah.
But one of the things about that type of personality, you learn very quickly after winning some arguments very successfully, is that no one really wins in a one argument of opposing viewpoints where the goal of the argument was to win.
Right.
Nobody walks away from that generally with their mind changed. And so that to me is like, that's a really good explanation of like what you can get out of a productive conversation. A productive conversation would be like you get in some insight into an opposing view. And like, keep in mind, I'm talking about this in the context of art too. Like a critique is an opposing moment, because you're going to be your biggest advocate for your art, or maybe your worst critic. But whatever it is, you're going to put that in front of another human being with different perspective, different standards. And sometimes they might not be objective. They might say they're being objective and not objectively critique. They might bring their own biases to it. I think most people do. And you're in a vulnerable position where you're almost having to hear, you're going to have to hear things that you may not agree with.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to hear things that might make you want to get defensive. But the problem is, if you get defensive, you're actually you might actually be putting a blockade on the ability to kind of work through and maybe gain some knowledge from it. Because like, while maybe let's say you sit through a critique and like 90% of it's subjective and pointless and was just kind of somebody feeding their own ego, which I've rarely had, but I have had those kind of critiques. Mm-hmm. There's still, if you approach it with an open mind and with confidence in what you've actually done, or what you actually think, you can come away with like 10% of knowledge on like how to improve that thing. And similarly with thought, or like with a discussion about like philosophy or about politics, you might actually like thinking about it personally. I would love to, like, I didn't support Donald Trump, and I'm not saying that to like say you shouldn't. I'm just saying that was my own take on the election. But I'm fascinated with getting in conversations with people who did, and hopefully not hostile conversations. Like, I actually want to know like what the motivating factors were that made them support, what the motivating factors were in their vote, and why they kind of lean politically the way they do. To me, like, that's a much more interesting thing than just kind of going after those people and going like, well, you're wrong. And that goes to like people way beyond, because in that case, I don't think that's like a clear-cut case of like good and evil. But honestly, there's some times where I'll want to talk to someone who, like, I want to actually hear what motivates people to do things and what they actually like, because I think otherwise you risk the possibility of kind of creating others,
right?
And creating kind of like this cartoon version of what someone thinks, or of being deluded. And that would tie, I know I'm jumping back and forth, but that seems like that would tie back into like kind of the art critique, where it's like, if you go into an art critique with a closed mind and defensive, you come out of that art critique and your art is at the same level it's at when you started. Your knowledge is at the same level that you started. So
and I want to run with the art thing, because I think there's a lot of value in having conversations, open conversations with people with opposing opinions, where you do not have the intent to change anyone's mind. There's a ton of good that can happen from that. But I think selfishly, and on topic, I think there's some real value in understanding how opposition works to further your creativity. And so whether you are a writer, a filmmaker, an illustrator, a comic book artist, a lot of the people in the community that are watching this, are making their own comics, and they wear all the hats, of those comics or whatever. understanding opposition is super important. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up is there is a difference between conflict and contention. And I actually don't think that contention is valuable. It's an interesting story point, and I think it's valuable, to increase the drama, of certain types of storytelling. But conflict is okay. Conflict is great, and without conflict, you have a huge problem, either in your art or your job or your relationship or your society. I used to hear, that stupid things, that the best relationships don't have any conflict. And it's like, no, the best relationships have the proper tools to be able to navigate conflict.
Exactly.
Because without conflict, one person is being oppressed. One of those people in that relationship is not able to express themselves. Because if you have two people that are exactly the same, one of them is not necessary. That's not how nature or God or the universe or natural selection or however you want to look at humanity. That's not how it works. We each one of us are completely different, and because we have reason and logic and empathy, we are at conflict within ourselves as well, right? Because it's not the animalistic nature of survival of the fittest. That's not how human beings work. We're a social creature, but that in and of itself is at conflict. And so as this applies to art, if you were to take this and understand your enemy, understand your villain, understand your hero, understand how there's, Mother Teresa has said, I really only began to understand things once I understood that there's a little bit of Hitler in all of us. I've had this discussion online, people are like, I don't want to understand Hitler, that's stupid. But Mother Teresa found that she was able to be a better person by understanding her potential to do evil so that she can avoid it.
Yeah. And I think that gets into the idea of I think the problem with Hitler in the first place, which is he dehumanized people, and dehumanizing people allows you to really commit terrible acts. And he, systematically got other people to dehumanize entire groups of people, and it led to terrible things. And so I think that's why I think that if you're trying to kind of be a rational being that's actually kind of hopefully contributing well to society, you as Cory stated before, you obviously draw clear lines in the sand of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But I think you need to kind of be able to retain an open mind and actually curiosity about other people in order to avoid dehumanizing people. And so to me, I think the other thing that we haven't really touched on too much is one of the values of kind of opposition, opposing viewpoints, and hearing, a good example is if you're in the comics camp and you love comic books and you adore everything about cartooning, it might behoove you to actually maybe step outside of that bubble and read some stuff by people who hate comics.
Yeah.
And read why they hate comics and what they think about comics and what it is that and not just hear it from a source saying, hey, this jerk hates comics, because that source is going to be biased, and you're kind of going to the choir, to hear people preach to the choir, and that's not necessarily going to leave you with any knowledge. What's interesting is if you go to kind of a source that you disagree with and you actually kind of check it out, I think that it can enrich the curiosity that allows you to write better and allows you to kind of explore things in art better. And also once again, avoid that thing Cory was talking about, the Captain Planet villains. Speaking of Captain Planet though, there is a College Humor bit on Captain Planet that's one of the funniest bits ever, where Captain Planet just kind of loses it and just starts blowing people up. It's hilarious.
That sounds awesome.
Definitely look that up when you guys are done watching this. But yeah.
So I've got one more point, and
perfect.
I think I was thinking of like, how does this really relate to illustration? And I actually believe in opposition as like a fundamental building block of the universe. And I was on Artcasters at one point in time, and I put forth a theory, and everybody in the chat was like, "No, that's super weird." So I won't do that here, maybe at some point, but I actually do believe that opposition allows things to exist, and without opposition, things cease to exist. You know, and so if you think about it, like dark exists because it's the absence of light, and light exists in comparison to the darkness, right? And so the idea of contrast is in the idea of opposition. And so if I were to go in on this page, it's really been really relevant to me because as I've been drawing this, I'm going to hit the mic with it, but as I've been drawing this, I'm trying to figure out a good balance in some of these things. And so you can look at some of these creatures. I wanted there to be a lot of black, right? But if at some point in time I were to go in and just fill the whole thing in with black, then there's no opposition to that. There's no value contrast. And without that value contrast, it's nothing. It's just a big blob of black. But it's sometimes that little bit of white, or sometimes that little bit of black, or that little bit of gray that makes something work, makes it stand out, makes it okay, because it's not just a white, I mean, without opposition, it would just be a white piece of paper or a black piece of paper.
Yeah, and I agree. There's these points. This is one of the fun things about art is there's these weird points where philosophy actually becomes practice.
Yeah.
And so like some of what Cory's describing is like embedded in the fundamentals of 2D design.
Yeah.
There are rules of thumb in art that are rules of thumb mainly because of juxtaposition, because an effective image is going to juxtapose two things at least. And so to create like a point of focus, you need proper juxtaposition in an image. And I know that's an overused term. I mean, there's even like a magazine called Juxtapose, and I know hipsters love using that word.
Yeah.
But there's a reason it's loved so much. And it's, I mean, like a perfect example of it's like the rule of thirds, where when you take an image that's perfectly balanced, where everything's centered, it's effective, it's balanced, but it's kind of boring for people, and people will actually lose focus on it. Whereas if you actually pick a third of the page to have your point of focus, and you'll notice, like, literally just start scrolling through like Ansel Adams photos or like classic illustrations, and once you kind of see the rule of thirds in action, it's hard to find art that was successful that didn't use it. There is art that didn't use it, like the whole Nouveau movement kind of throws that out the window and goes into a more ornate style of art, which I kind of straddle the line of sometimes too. But in general, like you'll start noticing like, oh, okay, my point of view on this photograph of the ocean goes right to the ocean because the ocean's cut at the bottom third of the image.
Right.
And the reason the third works is because it's in opposition to the part that's taking the whole. So you have whole in opposition with partial space. So it's like, if you don't have those opposing things, then you just have one thing, and the one thing is less effective visually. It's really interesting. And if you have two things that are perfectly opposing, it creates like a figure foreground flip, which is really fun to play with. So it's like, there's a lot to be learned in the practice of art too, not just the philosophy you're getting outside of art or getting in critiques of your art, but even in like the structure of art and what makes it effective in general through opposition. So yeah, I mean, I think we could go on this topic for a long time and go, like, I think I even started it by saying we can go in a lot of directions with this, but
right. Well, and I think future episodes we should touch on Gestalt.
Oh Yeah,
That
I
would be
love it.
that. I mean, you could probably do a full episode on each of the major Gestalt principles.
Ooh,
And I don't know. I don't know most people outside of art school, um, would really even understand what it is that we're talking about. But it's the psychology of why you perceive things visually the way that you do, and if
yeah,
you can begin to understand how your brain perceives the stimulus of vision, then you can really start to do some really cool stuff with your work.
yeah,
And
yeah,
a lot of that is this contrast, this conflict, this juxtaposition. And you had mentioned figure ground, which is one of those principles. So
yeah.
a little teaser for the future,
Yes.
but yeah,
So
go ahead.
so let's cap it by giving some just kind of like suggestions that at least for me like have been helpful for me as an artist and just in life in general to kind of have more of a standpoint of kind of exploration in my knowledge base.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one of the key things is like anytime you experience resistance to a conversation, to advice on art, to anything similar to that, question that resistance. Like what's the origin of it? Is this just about ego? Because if it's about ego, you're gonna have a tough time becoming a good artist if you're all about ego.
Yeah.
Um, and and that kind of ties into the second, which is to try to kind of avoid your ego when it comes to art, because you aren't going to be next to your artwork. So unless you're going to be like a fine artist showing in galleries that you're always going to be at to kind of explain your picture, then you need to kind of leave your ego behind, because no one's going to know your ego from your art unless you effectively communicate it. Um, and then the last thing is to maybe start thinking of opposition as a good thing in the sense of like an enriching thing, because the worst you get out of opposition is a more sharpened knowledge of what your viewpoint is, and the best that you get out of it is potentially more information that'll actually make you better. And so like that's kind of my kind of spin on the whole thing. And do you have anything to add to that, like for just tips on how artists should deal with opposition? Because there's also opposition from the industry. I mean, there's all sorts of
Yeah.
ways we could go with that.
Yeah, I think the best thing on opposition I ever heard might not feel like it's directly relatable, but in my mind it is. Chris Oatley once said that you are never as good or as bad as you think you are.
Yeah.
And so anything anything that comes and flies in the face of your self perception, both as a either as a compliment or as a put down or whatever. If it rattles what you think about yourself, like take a moment and be like, why did I have such a heavy reaction to that? And that could be really helpful, because sometimes like we're all really hard on ourselves, and sometimes I've been working on this lately, and if anybody has ever complimented my work, you'll see that I'm really bad at accepting a compliment. I tend to make an excuse or turn it into a self-deprecating joke or something, because it just makes me really uncomfortable. I like it and it's helpful and it's nice, but like I don't know what to say, so I'm always like, I have this fear that I just want people to know that I'm not as cool as they might think I am. I'd be like, I actually really suck really bad. Thanks for saying that nice thing about me. Bye. It's like, but why is that? And analyzing that, or getting a critique on something can also be equally hard. And you can be like, well, I thought that was really good, and I worked really hard on that, and I've spent years to get to this point. And while all that can be true and it can still be good, look at that critique and say, maybe that hurts because it's true. Maybe I didn't draw that hand very well, or her head really is out of proportion, or her eye really is in the wrong place, or whatever. And then go, okay, next time I can do better.
Yeah, agreed.
So
and I think just the one thing I actually forgot to say when facing opposition too is like, don't like, and this is really good advice that I got given to me when I got into teaching and when I got into art direction, from people who had taught and art directed, which is don't forget that you're the teacher and don't forget that you're the art director.
Yeah.
And in this case, I'd say don't forget who you are, like, and the power in that. Because a lot of the fear of opposition, and the fear of even kind of being less defensive when it comes to opposition is really like a wall or a shell you've built around yourself to kind of avoid, like, you know, taking the opposition because we assume we can't. But if you kind of remember the value of who you are, the value of what you bring, and like the power of just like being an individual, creating, then it's like you really don't have much to fear going into a situation of opposition. The majority of the time in art, like I said, the worst hit is going to be your ego. And if your ego is that fragile, you might have some reassessment to do of like psychologically, like before you get into the whole field, because this field will do a number on egos, like both egos that are fed and then starved, or egos that are overfed. And then, you know, that can lead to things like, you know, a fan coming up to you at a convention and being kind of a jerk to them, you know,
right.
like, which doesn't usually translate to a very long career with fans. So it's like, that would be kind of the biggest thing that I actually can't believe I forgot to mention at the top, which is just like going into it, don't forget like how strong you are, like as a human being, because I think a lot of the time defensiveness and walls like that actually show weakness.
Yeah.
And whereas, like, have you ever had one of those moments where, like, I've totally had this, where I've had these students who are so confident with themselves, not in a negative way, that they'll sit through a critique and they'll be like, thanks. And it's like the impression they give off is like, holy crap. And, you know, they might go home and be like, I'm going to do 3 of those things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, the perception you give off by just being like, yeah, okay. Like,
yeah, that's great. That's really good.
Yeah. It breaks down walls and stuff. So yeah.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
It.
Yeah. And those are few and far between in the undergraduate.
Yes.
Because I think that's a pretty mature stance to be able to get to. So if you can get to that, good on you, mate. I don't know why I slipped into Australian all of a sudden. But,
well, it's because of the nefarious, dark things that we're doing with graphic design and art.
Right. It's because of Australia. Yeah. So if you would like to learn more about the United World Government string theory conspiracy of how the Sasquatch men are going to take over with the mole men through the hatching and negative space patterns that come through in the cipher of the ink work in your favorite comics, then you can go to quarterlystories.com and you can see a ton of hatching. I really actually want to see somebody do like a fake PowerPoint with our work based on the stuff we've shown on Instagram and whatever, and like find patterns that aren't there and then make it into like a big alien conspiracy, because that would be my favorite thing ever.
You see in the negative space, that's an alien. That's an alien right there. Like, they didn't accidentally make that. That's right there.
If you convert this into binary, it actually says, take me to your leader. So if you want to take a look at my stuff and find the secret hidden messages, actually, in a lot of times I do work in random weird stuff. It just doesn't have anything to do with some secret conspiracy. It's just because I want to see if anybody catches it. You can go to corykerr.com. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. And if you want to do stuff with the podcast, go to corykerr.com/48hr. And if you haven't already, because I know some of you have, go leave a review on that podcast, because that would be awesome. You guys rock. Make sure the aliens don't get you. And we'll see you on Monday.